Welcome, learners, to another deep dive. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of nature's most dazzling transformations, how a delicate flower becomes the nourishing bounty of a fruit. If you've ever watched a rosebud unfurl or, wondered how a tiny blossom turns into a juicy tomato, you're about to uncover some incredible biological engineering.
Indeed, this deep dive is all about that ingenious journey of plant reproduction. We're drawing key insights from Brian Capon's Botany for Gardeners. We'll reveal the science behind the splendor, showing how plants meticulously engineer their own future, one flower and one seed at a time. Our aim is really to connect those intricate cellular and biochemical mechanisms to the observable growth and survival strategies you see every day.
Yeah, our mission today is to give you a clear, engaging overview of this whole flower-to-fruit process. We'll examine the fascinating parts of a flower, explore how plants cleverly attract their visitors, unravel the amazing ways pollen travels, and discover what truly happens once that pollen lands. You'll see how even the smallest details lead to dramatic growth and survival, and we'll share some surprisingly practical insights for anyone who loves plants, whether you're a seasoned gardener or just, well, curious. So let's jump in. Okay, so when we look at a flower, we often just see beauty, right? But beneath those vibrant petals, there's an incredibly sophisticated biological machine at work. What are the core components making that happen?
It's true, yeah. Every single part of a flower, from its visible petals to its hidden structures, it's meticulously designed for one primary purpose: reproduction. You can think of the flower as having sort of a central base, the receptacle where all its parts are attached. The first things you usually notice are, well, the protective layers. The outermost are the sepals. They're often small and green, acting like a tiny shield for the unopened bud, much like that green casing around a rosebud. They might curl back or even fall off as the flower opens. Inside those, you find the petals, which form the corolla. That's the real showstopper. These are typically brightly colored, designed for display. Sometimes, though, the sepals are colorful too, or there's no clear distinction, like in a tulip, where they're actually called tepals. And here's something fascinating. The color of those petals often tells you a lot about the pollinator the flower is trying to attract. Bees, for instance, they're drawn to blues and violets, while hummingbirds often prefer reds.
So those outer layers are essentially the flower's advertising and protection, is that right? Where does the actual reproductive action happen then?
Precisely. Right at the heart of the flower, you've got the reproductive structures, the male parts of the stamens. Each stamen has a slender stalk called a filament, and at its tip there's an anther. This anther is where the incredibly fine, dust-like pollen develops. Each tiny pollen grain contains cells that will eventually form sperm. And what's truly remarkable is that every plant species has uniquely shaped pollen, almost like a microscopic fingerprint. It actually helps botanists identify ancient plant life from fossilized grains. Pretty cool, huh?
Wow, yeah, like a fingerprint. Okay. And the female parts.
Right, then there's the female part, the pistil. This is typically divided into three sections. The very top is the stigma, which is a sticky surface engineered specifically to capture pollen. And below that, the style is the stalk that elevates the stigma, positioning it just right, to catch that incoming pollen. At the base, you have the ovary. This is the critical chamber that will ultimately mature into the fruit. Inside the ovary are the ovules, the undeveloped seeds, each containing an egg just ready for fertilization.
It's amazing how this seemingly simple beauty is actually such a complex, perfectly engineered system. How do all these parts vary, though? And what does that tell us about the plant's strategy?
That's a great question because this design is far from static. Flowers show limitless variation, and botanists use these differences for classification. They can be complete, meaning they have all those parts we just described, or incomplete. Petals and sepals might be separate, like in a pansy, or they might be united into tubes, like the bell shape of a foxglove. Some even form these cool crown-like outgrowths, like the corona of a daffodil. And think about symmetry. A lily, for example, is radially symmetrical, meaning you can slice it any way through its center and it looks the same. But then compare that to something like a snapdragon or an orchid. Those are bilaterally symmetrical. They have a distinct top and bottom, often evolved for very specific pollinators to land just so.
So every curve and color has a strategic purpose. Okay, once a flower is fully formed, how does it ensure its pollen gets where it needs to go? It sounds like a sophisticated dating game.
It absolutely is. Pollination, that critical transfer of pollen, is often a masterpiece of cooperation, especially when animals get involved. Flowers use an incredible array of tactics: vibrant colors, unique shapes, enticing aromas to lure insects, birds, even small mammals. The anthers are often positioned just perfectly to dust pollen onto the animal's body. And as this little courier visits other flowers, some of that pollen rubs off onto their sticky stigmas. It's all finely tuned. For example, the long tubular flowers of a torch lily. They're perfectly shaped for a sunbird's beak. Or think about a poinsettia. Those brilliant red petals aren't petals at all. They're modified leaves called bracts, acting as a huge beacon for pollinators to find the tiny flowers in the center.
That partnership sounds incredibly efficient. What's in it for these animal matchmakers? What's the reward?
Well, it's usually a mutually beneficial relationship. While some insects do eat pollen, the bigger prize for most is nectar. That's a sugary liquid exuded by specialized glands called nectaries. Nectar can be pretty easy to get to, like a visible drop in Queen Anne's lace that attracts ants or flies. Or it can be hidden deep within a trumpet-like flower, or even in these tubular projections called spurs, like in a columbine. Those require, long proboscis from honeybees or the tongues of hummingbirds. Some flowers even involve a bit of a challenge. They make the pollinator assume a specific position or even release a spring mechanism just to reach the nectar. This basically guarantees they brush against the reproductive parts. Clever, huh?
Very clever, and I've noticed patterns on some petals, almost like landing strips. Are those part of the strategy too?
They absolutely are. Many flowers have what we call nectar guides. These are patterns on their petals like converging stripes, dots, or bright circles. They act like visual road maps, instinctively directing insects straight to the reward, right past the waiting stamens and pistils. And here's something you might not expect. Some flower pigments reflect ultraviolet light. They create these dazzling patterns that are totally invisible to our eyes, but perfectly clear to many insects.
That's incredible. Invisible roadmaps. It's also amazing how many different forms flowers take. Sometimes what we think is just one flower is actually a whole collection of them clustered together.
You're exactly right. Those are called inflorescences, clusters of many smaller flowers working together as a unit. Think of a daisy or a sunflower. What looks like one large flower is actually a central cluster of tiny disc flowers surrounded by what we call ray flowers, which have those conspicuous strap-like petals acting as attractants. This arrangement often relates directly to pollinator behavior. Composite heads like sunflowers make ideal landing platforms for small insects, while taller spikes might attract hummingbirds. Some inflorescences even offer convenient perches for birds while they feed.
So if animals are such critical couriers, what happens if there aren't any around? Do plants just, give up on reproduction?
Not at all. Plants have evolved alternative, equally clever strategies. Take wind-pollinated flowers, for example. They're often quite inconspicuous, not needing showy petals or sweet scents. Instead, they produce just clouds of dry, powdery pollen from anthers that dangle on these quivering filaments. And often, protruding from their tiny blossoms, you'll find disproportionately large, feather-like stigmas sweeping the air trying to capture that wind-borne pollen. While it seems inefficient, wasting so much pollen to the breeze, this method has been incredibly successful for millions of years. It works particularly well for ancient gymnosperms like pines, and also many advanced flowering plants like grasses, reeds, oaks, and elms. Water pollination is less common, but just as fascinating. In some aquatic plants like ribbonweed, the male flowers actually detach and float on the water surface like tiny sailboats. They eventually make contact with female flowers. Other plants, like eelgrasses, have these unusual thread-like pollen grains, adapted specifically to tangle around stigmas when they're swept by waves.
This raises an important question, though. How do plants ensure they get the right kind of pollen, and how do they manage to generate genetic diversity? It seems like self-pollination would be easier, but maybe not as good long-term.
That's exactly right, and it gets into the nuances of self versus cross-pollination. Sexual reproduction generally requires compatible pollen, usually from the same species. While plants can sometimes self-pollinate, cross-pollination or outbreeding, which is mixing genetic material from different parents of the same species, offers significant selective advantages. It promotes genetic diversity and resilience. So plants have developed elaborate methods to favor this. For instance, some have self-incompatibility mechanisms. These are basically chemical barriers on the stigma that literally treat the plant's own pollen as foreign. Others use spatial separation, positioning their anthers and stigmas to physically avoid self-contact. Or they use staggered timing, where pollen release and stigma receptiveness happen at different times on the same flower or plant. And to further ensure cross-pollination, some plants go even further and have separate male and female flowers altogether. If both types of flowers are on the same plant, like you see in corn, walnut, or melons, we call that monoecious. But in dioecious species, like willow or date palm trees, the male and female flowers are actually born on entirely separate individual plants. You need both a male and female plant nearby to get fruit.
Wow, that's quite a commitment to cross-pollination. But what if conditions aren't ideal for those preferred methods? Like, what if it's raining and the bees stay home?
That's where a backup plan often comes in handy. If cross-pollination fails, say on a cool, damp day when insects aren't active, some species have evolved clever self-pollinating systems as a fail-safe. While this does limit genetic diversity, it's certainly far better than no reproduction at all. You might see anthers physically curling over to sweep past the stigma, like in a nasturtium, or maybe elongating just enough to touch it. There's even this fascinating condition called cleistogamy. Some flowers just remain permanently closed and self-pollinate inside the bud. This happens especially in cold climates or under certain light conditions. It cleverly conserves energy by not having to produce metabolically expensive things like nectar or showy petals. And of course, we shouldn't forget nocturnal pollination. Flowers that open at night often have pale colors, which are more visible in dim light, and they emit their strongest fragrances during darkness to attract nocturnal animals like moths.
Okay, so through one method or another, a compatible pollen grain finally lands on the stigma. What happens next? What's this incredible, almost invisible journey to create a seed and then a fruit?
Right, this is where the real magic of fertilization unfolds, deep inside the flower. So a pollen grain actually contains two cells. Once it lands on that sticky stigma, one of these cells rapidly starts to grow into a pollen tube. You can imagine it like a microscopic tunnel burrowing down through the pistils tissues, actively searching for a tiny opening in one of the ovules inside the ovary. This growth is incredibly fast and is fueled by substances provided by the stigma and the style tissues. Now, as that pollen tube elongates, the second cell inside the original pollen grain divides to form two sperm cells. These then travel down the tube like passengers directly into the ovule. Inside the ovule, an egg is waiting. One sperm unites with this egg to form a zygote. This zygote will develop into the miniature plant, the embryo, nestled within the future seed. The second sperm does something really interesting too. It combines with another cell within the ovule to form the endosperm. This is a crucial temporary food storage tissue. Its job is to nourish the developing embryo and, in many cases, the young seedling when it starts to germinate later on.
And this whole process is what triggers the fruit to form around it.
Exactly. As the ovules grow and mature into seeds, they remain enclosed by the ovary. The ovary itself then slowly enlarges, developing into the fruit. The fruit is essentially the protective container for those precious seeds. The growth of the embryo and the seeds actually triggers hormones like gibberellin, which actively promote that fruit enlargement. And here's a practical takeaway for you gardeners out there. If pollen tubes only successfully deliver sperm to the ovules in, say, just one segment of the pistil, the resulting fruit will often only enlarge on that side. That leads to those occasional kind of misshapen fruits you might sometimes see. Understanding this helps you appreciate the impact of incomplete or uneven pollination.
That's amazing. So a perfectly shaped fruit really starts with this intricate dance of microscopic cells and successful pollination. But what about those fruits we buy that don't have any seeds, like bananas or some oranges?
Yes. That brings us to some unusual, but actually pretty common cases. The main one is called parthenocarpy. This is the development of full-grown fruits without any pollination, fertilization, or seed development happening at all. Think of your seedless navel oranges, most common bananas or pineapples. These are often called virgin fruits. For gardeners, a key practical point here is that since these fruits don't produce seeds, parthenocarpic varieties can only be propagated by vegetative means, things like cuttings or grafts. You can't just plant their non-existent seeds. It's also worth noting, though, that not all seedless fruits are technically parthenocarpic. Some, like certain types of seedless grapes, actually do undergo pollination and fertilization, but the embryo aborts very early on, and the seeds just fail to enlarge. And then there's an even more unusual process called apomixis. Here, certain cells within the ovule, other than the fertilized egg, develop directly into a viable embryo. This completely bypasses fertilization altogether. The resulting plant is genetically identical to the single parent that bore the pistil and ovule. You see this in some citrus varieties, for instance.
It's incredible, the sheer variety in how fruits form. How do botanists even begin to classify all of them? Must be complicated.
Well, if we try to look at the bigger picture, botanists do have an elaborate system. They classify fruits, primarily based on the structure of the pericarp, that's the fruit wall, and also how the seeds are dispersed, and the fruit's overall developmental origin for the flower parts. So as the ovary develops into the pericarp, it can become fleshy and soft, like in a peach, or it can become dry and hard, like an acorn. Some dry fruits split open dramatically to release seeds, like pea pods. Others scatter seeds through small holes, like poppy capsules. And some, like nuts, remain closed until they decay.
And thinking back, what we commonly call the fruit isn't always derived from the same botanical part, is it? You mentioned strawberries earlier.
Exactly right. That's a key point. The edible part of most fleshy fruits is indeed the pericarp tissue, which comes from the flower's ovary wall. However, in apples and pears, for example, that enlarged fleshy part we eat is actually the perianth tube formed from the fused base of the petals and sepals, not the ovary wall itself. Or, take that strawberry again, the luscious red part is actually the enlarged receptacle, which was the little green dome at the center of the flower. The tiny ripened ovaries. The true fruits, botanically speaking, are those little things we call seeds scattered on its surface. When it comes to basic classification, fruits are generally grouped by how they develop from the flower structures. A simple fruit comes from a flower with a single ovary, think tomato, orange, grape, or peach. An aggregate fruit is formed from a single flower that had many separate ovaries all on one receptacle. Good examples are blackberries or raspberries. Each tiny juice sac in a blackberry is actually a separate little fruit derived from one ovary. And then you have multiple fruits. These form from the fusion of several ovaries, but each ovary came from a separate flower that was part of a dense cluster, an inflorescence. Pineapple is the classic example here. Each segment you see on the outside represents a fused fruit from an individual flower, all merged into one edible mass.
Okay, so the fruit has formed, the seeds inside are ready. This feels like the final act. Getting those seeds away from the parent plant to start a whole new life somewhere else.
Precisely. Seed dispersal is an absolutely crucial survival strategy. It ensures that new seedlings don't end up competing directly with the parent plant for vital resources like sunlight, water, and soil nutrients. The fruit's primary function, beyond protecting the seeds, is often facilitating this journey. And nature has some truly astonishing dispersal mechanisms. Some fruits, believe it or not, like those of the tropical sandbox tree, forcibly eject their seeds when they dry and crack open. They literally explode, scattering seeds at an astonishing 150 miles per hour. Pine mistletoe can launch its sticky seeds 50 feet into the air like tiny bullets.
Wow, 150 miles per hour, that's intense.
Isn't it? Then you have wind dispersal, which is very common. Many seeds are designed specifically for air travel. Maple and ash fruits have those distinctive wings that make them spin as they fall, acting like mini helicopters, carrying them away from the parent tree. Dandelion fruits, which every gardener knows well, have those feathery parachutes designed for widespread dispersal on the breeze. And orchids produce absolutely vast numbers of incredibly fine, dust-like seeds that are easily carried great distances by even slight air currents. For water dispersal, seeds and fruits often possess air-filled cavities and waterproof coverings. Think of a coconut. Its thick, fibrous husk gives it enough buoyancy to float for potentially miles on ocean currents before washing ashore somewhere new to germinate. And then there's animal dispersal, which is a huge category with lots of variations. Some seeds or fruits have hooks and barbs, like the cocklebur. They're designed to snag onto animal fur or feathers, or even lodge in muddy feet, essentially hitching a ride before being groomed off or falling off later. Parasitic mistletoe seeds are sticky. They adhere to birds' feet and then get transferred to tree bark when the bird stops to preen. Waterfowl wading through marshes can carry plant seeds embedded in mud stuck to their bodies for quite some distance. But perhaps the most common and effective method is internal transport. Animals eat fleshy fruits, digest the nutritious pulp, and then excrete the seeds unharmed, often far from the original plant, and sometimes even deposited with a little bit of natural fertilizer. The food value for the animal becomes a powerful incentive to eat and distribute more seeds, establishing a really effective, mutually beneficial relationship.
Gosh, all of this, the incredibly beautiful flowers, the often delicious fruits, these amazing, sometimes explosive dispersal strategies, it sounds like an enormous investment of energy and resources for a single plant.
It absolutely is, and that raises a really important ecological and biological question.
Yeah.
What's the actual cost of reproduction for a plant? It's immense. A significant portion of a plant's stored food reserves and its overall energy budget is dedicated solely to this process. Annual species, for example, the ones that live just one season, typically allocate maybe 20–30% of their total resources just to flowering and fruiting. Perennials, which live longer, might use about half that percentage each year. But here's the thing. Under stress, say, during a drought or when soil nutrients are low, many plants will actually increase this allocation, sometimes up to 50% or even more. They prioritize ensuring the survival of the species, even at considerable cost to their own individual health or longevity. producing flowers, nectar, pollen, foods, and seeds. These are all metabolically very expensive processes. Even long-lived trees like pines tax the resources heavily for their yearly cone and seed crops.
So this intense dedication to reproduction can even be fatal for the plant itself in some cases.
Precisely. For many annual species, their programmed death after setting seed is largely due to the sheer metabolic stress these reproductive processes place on their systems. They essentially spend all their energy ensuring the next generation. Similarly, you see this in some large perennial plants too. Think of the century plants, certain agave species. They might live for 6, 10, even 15 years, storing up resources, then produce one absolutely massive, towering inflorescence with tons of seeds, and then the entire plant dies. This ultimate sacrifice really underscores the incredible lengths living organisms are willing to go, the price they're willing to pay for the survival and continuation of their species. It's a pretty profound testament, I think, to the power of continuity in the natural world.
Wow. What an incredible journey we've just traced. From the intricate design of a flower's petals and all its reproductive parts to the ingenious way as pollen manages to travel, and then the dramatic dispersal of seeds, we've really seen how every single step in plant reproduction is a testament to nature's incredible engineering, and how it's all deeply tied to those underlying cellular and biochemical mechanisms.
Exactly. And this isn't just, fascinating abstract science. Understanding these processes really deepens your practical skills and appreciation as a gardener, too. You can now better appreciate why different flowers attract specific pollinators, why some of your fruits might be oddly shaped sometimes, why certain seedless varieties need special propagation methods like cuttings, and even why some plants have such short, intense life cycles ending in seed production. This knowledge truly changes how you see your garden, doesn't it? It connects the visible growth you tend to, the hidden, complex biology making it all happen.
It really does. So, thinking about all this, what stands out most to you about the sheer dedication, the sheer investment of plants to ensure their next generation survives? Think about the flowers you see every day now, maybe in your own garden or neighborhood, and all that intricate biology that's constantly at play. It really does change the way you look at a simple tomato plant or a dandelion, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And look, this deep dive is really just a glimpse into the vast and endlessly fascinating world of botany. We sincerely hope it motivates you, our learners, to continue exploring the hidden lives of the plants all around us. The more you learn, the more you come to appreciate this incredible green world that ultimately sustains us all.
Keep those curious minds open, keep observing, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.